If you keep putting things off, even when you know they matter, this is probably why. You tell yourself you'll start later, that you just need to feel ready first, maybe after a break, maybe tomorrow, maybe when you have more energy. But that moment never really comes. So things get delayed again and again. And eventually it starts to feel like a discipline problem. Like you're just not consistent enough, not focused enough, not motivated enough. But procrastination isn't about laziness. It's about avoidance. Because when you put something off, you're not avoiding the task itself. You're avoiding how it makes you feel. That could be pressure, overwhelm, uncertainty, or even the fear of doing it badly. And your brain is wired to avoid anything that feels uncomfortable. So instead of starting, it looks for relief, something easier, something familiar, something that doesn't create that same tension. That's why you reach for your phone, you scroll, you check something else. You do anything except the thing you actually need to do. Not because you don't care, but because your brain is trying to protect you from discomfort. The problem is that relief is temporary because the task doesn't go away. It stays there in the background, quietly building pressure, and the longer you avoid it, the heavier it starts to feel. What might have been a small task at the start now feels overwhelming. Something you don't even want to think about. And the more overwhelming it feels, the more you avoid it. And that's how procrastination becomes a cycle. You avoid because it feels uncomfortable. It grows over time, so you avoid it even more until eventually it starts to feel like you're stuck. Like no matter how much you want to change, you can't seem to take that first step. But the problem isn't that you can't do the task. It's that you're trying to start it in the worst possible state when you're already overwhelmed, already distracted, already mentally drained. And in that state, even simple things feel difficult. So your brain resists, not because it's broken, but because it's overloaded. This is why telling yourself to just do it doesn't work, because that ignores what's actually happening underneath. You're not dealing with a lack of action. You're dealing with resistance. And resistance comes from friction. Too many decisions, unclear steps, too much pressure, too many expectations. So instead of trying to force yourself to do everything, you need to make it easier to start, smaller, simpler, clearer. Because the hardest part of anything is the beginning. Once you start, the resistance drops, the pressure eases, and things begin to move. But getting to that point is what most people struggle with because they think they need motivation first. They think they need to feel ready, but motivation doesn't come before action. It comes after. Once you begin, even in a small way, your brain starts to engage. The task becomes less intimidating, more manageable, less unclear, and that's when momentum builds. But if you wait until you feel motivated, you stay stuck. Because motivation rarely shows up when something feels heavy. It shows up after you've already started. That's why small actions matter so much. Opening the document, writing one sentence, doing 5 minutes. It doesn't sound like much, but it breaks a cycle. It moves you out of avoidance and into action. And once you're in action, everything changes. You're no longer thinking about doing the task. You're doing it. And that shift is what removes resistance. Another thing that makes procrastination worse is trying to do too much at once. When something feels too big, your brain doesn't know where to start. So it delays, not because it can't do it, but because it doesn't have a clear entry point. That's why breaking things down matters, not into perfect plans, but into obvious starting points. Something so simple, there's no thinking required because the less you have to think, the easier it is to act. And the easier it is to act, the less likely you are to procrastinate. So instead of asking, How do I stop procrastinating? Ask something more useful. What's making this hard to start? Is it unclear? Is it too big? Is it something you're overthinking? Because once you remove that friction, starting becomes easier. And when starting becomes easier, procrastination starts to fade. Not instantly, but gradually, as you build momentum, as you reduce resistance, as you make action easier than avoidance. So if you've been putting things off lately, it's probably not because you're lazy. It's because something about the task feels too heavy to start, and your brain is trying to avoid that feeling. Fix that, and everything changes.